everybody, and welcome to today's webinar. For those of you who joined us last month, we did a webinar on pledges and auto deductions, and because of the large amounts of things to cover in pledges, we really didn't get a lot of time to cover the auto deductions. So it was rather rushed and we missed out on a lot of things. So this month we are going to now cover auto deductions in a lot more details, and then perhaps a few other points on pledges. So to begin with, I'm going to cover the auto deduction side, and then I'll pass over to Gary later on for some final comments. Now, as I said, I'm going to start with talking about auto deductions. So one of the reasons why people would like to use auto deductions is because it provides consistent income across the year. Auto deductions is where people will sign up and they will pledge to give a certain amount of money on a regular basis, generally speaking 12 times a year, but it needn't be that. It could be twice a year, 4 times a year, anything that you like pretty much. The consistent income comes because you're going to be deducting from their credit card or their bank account probably once a month, and that way, instead of having those two huge peaks where you have your tax appeal and your Christmas appeal, and then for the rest of the year it kind of drops off, this way you have that underlying consistent income across the whole year. Because of the way that the auto deduct system works, it actually generates the donations for you in the Newdon file itself. So rather than you having to enter all of their details, that's already done for you. So it simplifies and quickens the process of processing those donations. In time, if you can build up a large number of these auto deduct donors, then those donations will, if you had to enter them manually, will be quite tedious. And then the other good thing about auto deductions is once somebody is signed up to actually do the auto deductions, they actually have to do something to stop them from happening. Unlike when you do a mail out for your Christmas or tax appeal, at those times they need to make a decision as to whether they're going to pay or not. And if it's Christmas, they might say, oh, money's a bit short, I won't bother. Whereas with the auto deductions, it's a lot easier for them to give maybe $10 or $20 a month than maybe $50 twice a year. And as I said, they have to actually ring you up or contact you in some way to stop it. So it means that it's less likely to happen. Now, auto deductions can be done from either credit cards, and if you're doing it via credit cards, you can either use a gateway if you have the gateway module, or you can just do it from normal bank account just like you do now with normal credit cards. So either way it can be handled, and the other alternate way of doing direct debits is, well, direct auto deducts is from the bank account. So they can give you bank account details and you can then create a file for the bank that you then upload. The bank then does the transfer from their bank account directly into yours. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to have a look at how to set this up. Now, auto deducts are based on pledges, so you need to have a good understanding of pledges in order to be able to understand how the auto deductions work. Last month, Gary covered pledges in general and covered that to a lot of detail. So if you weren't watching last month's webinar, I would suggest that perhaps after this you can go and watch that webinar and get all the details on actually setting up the pledges. So I'm not going to cover all of the ins and outs of pledges. What I am going to look at is specifically those areas that are to do with auto deductions. Now, you can set up pledge records in a number of different ways, but the easiest way is from donor entry. Now, I should mention again from last month's webinar, before you can set up a pledge record, you need to set up a pledge campaign. For auto deductions, you can have several different auto deductions based on all sorts of different things. You might have some that are yearly, some that are monthly, or you might have them for different reasons. Some might give for one particular purpose, others might give to another. It doesn't matter. So long as they are pledge records, then they can be used for auto deductions if you choose to do them that way. The easiest way to set up pledge records is via the donor entry screen. So if we go into donor entry now, we have what you hopefully are familiar with, and that's the donor record. When you set up a pledge, you can just simply click on the pledge button once you've actually found the donor. Now, I'm going to bring up the first donor on the system, and you'll see that the pledge button is already in red. So that means that there is at least one pledge record there, and when I click on that, it brings up the pledge record. Gary covered all of this top section down to here, plus a little bit at the bottom. The bit I'm going to talk about is in this square at the bottom, or rectangle, and that's to do with auto deductions. Now, just a word here. If they already have a pledge record and you want to create a new one, all you need to do is simply press F12 or click on the clear button down the bottom. That clears the pledge records that's there, and then you can page down, and I can set one up as pledge or regular, whichever. I've got two campaigns there. I'm actually going to escape out, and we'll actually find somebody else who doesn't have a pledge record. So here we have donor number 3. The pledge button is black, so we know that there are no pledge records. So this is for Mr. Jules Verne. Okay, so as we enter through, I'm going to call it regular because that's what I've called all my regular auto deductions, but I could have also done that to my campaign that's called pledge. Most of this stuff at the top I'm going to ignore. Again, that was covered by Gary last week, so I'm just going to say he gives $100, 12 times a year, which is probably what most people will give. The date of next gift. Now, when it comes to the date of next gift, you can choose to either put it on any particular day. You could put today's dates, you could put a day next month, depending on what they've asked. He might say, look, I'd like to sign up, but please don't deduct it till next month, so I could then put on the 1st of June. It's often useful to synchronize all of those dates so that it's always going to be the one date, and a lot of that depends a little bit on the day in the month that you choose to do your auto deduct run. Some places will run multiple auto deduct runs, perhaps 2 or 3 per month. Some will only do it once. It's more normal to just do it once. So let's assume that that's the case here. Now, I'm going to put the 1st of the month, even though today is not the 1st. By doing it on the 1st of the month, then I'm pretty much covered for any day of the month that I want to run this on. It's not a fixed pledge. So now, this is where we get into the auto deduction details. We have to say yes to auto deduction, otherwise it will skip over everything else in that box. So now we have the choice. Do we want to do this via direct debit from a bank account, or do we want to do it from credit card? So if we do direct debit, then it's going to ask us the details like the bank and branch details. So 456 is the BSB, and then the account number. So I can just make something up, something like that. And the drawer is just the account name. If I were to go back and change that to credit card, then it's going to give me a different series of questions. For instance, what's the card type? So I'm going to say V for Visa. This is now going to be the card name as opposed to the account name. What's the expiry? I'll put 12/17, say. And then it automatically, when I'm creating a new record, it's going to ask for the card number. If I was editing this, then that edit card number field down here would say no, but if you need to change the details, then you would say yes, and it would bring up this details here. So I'm going to come up with a number here that I know is going to work, just a dummy number. And the security number is actually not used, but I'm going to put it in if I know it, because later on, who knows, it may be necessary. When I save this record, that credit card detail or card number is going to be encrypted. So if I were to run a visual reporter report, and I'll show you one of these shortly, then you won't be able to actually look at that. If you're using a gateway, then it will actually go out to the gateway. The gateway will receive that information and pass something back called a token, and it then uses that token from now on instead of the card number. So by using the gateway, it means that you don't have to store any credit card numbers on the system, and Gary's going to show you that a little bit later on. We're next on this receipt field. Do they need a receipt? Now, for most people who are giving 12 times a year, you would say no to that. Otherwise, they're going to get a receipt every time. That's 12 receipts that they're going to get, which is a pain for them because they then have to keep those separate and then they use those for tax purposes. Whereas by saying no to receipt, you can then generate an end-of-year receipt at the end of the financial year and send that to them. So it saves you all of that postage and it saves them having to keep track of where all of their receipts are. Now, no matter what you say on that receipt yes or no field, when you actually come to run the auto deduct batch, you can override that. So whether they've said yes or no, you can say, I want them all to get a receipt. I can say, nobody gets a receipt, or you can just say, well, honour whatever they've requested on there. So if you've got someone who maybe pays twice a year, maybe it's worthwhile sending them those receipts, and you could say receipt yes. Otherwise, for most people where it's 12 times a year, simply say no. I don't need to edit the receipt name, so that's no worries. Now, with the ledger code, if we leave that blank, then that donation will go into whatever the default is for the campaign that I've chosen. So when the campaign for regular was set up, there was a default ledger code that was chosen. However, if Mr. Jules Verne said, actually, I want my money to go somewhere slightly different for a particular purpose, then I can choose something, maybe it's sponsorship, say, and so I can then assign that the ledger code. And so Jules Verne's donations, his auto deducts, will go to that ledger code. Everybody else's, where that's been left blank, will simply go to the default for that campaign. If it was a subscription campaign, maybe they were buying a certain number of copies of a magazine, I could put that there, but that's not really used for auto deductions. Okay, do they need a reminder? Well, certainly not for auto deductions. They don't need to be sent something to say, hey, don't forget to make your payment, because of course that payment's automatically going to happen when you generate your auto deduct batch. We have a comments field there. Generally, it's not used for too much unless there's something special. But if you do have a gateway, and if this particular donation is rejected by the gateway, by default, it will put into the comments field the last reason why it was rejected. So it can be useful to look up their pledge to see why it was rejected. There are other ways, of course, at the time, so that's more of an historical record. Okay, now when I press enter, it skips over to press enter to save. However, there's an important field down the bottom here called auto ded done for auto deduction done. When you actually run an auto deduct, it will set that flag to a yes if it picks this record to be deducted and generates a donation for it. So if you're running several different auto deductions at the same time, maybe with different criteria, by having that field set to a yes when we do that auto deduction, it means that it will not pick that auto deduction or that pledge again until you've run through end of day. It's only when you run the end of day update that the auto deduction done flag is set back to a no. Sometimes you may run an auto deduct and you're expecting to get certain donations or pledges deducted, and they don't. And there could be several reasons for that, but one of those is that perhaps if you've had a rejection and maybe somehow you've removed that donation from the batch, that donation then doesn't go through end of day, therefore that auto deduction done flag is not reset to a no. Now, if you're fairly up to date, when you delete a donation that's an auto deduct, it should reset that back to a no. But if you find that something's not being deducted, just check that field because that may well be the case. Okay, so I'm going to press enter to save that. So I've saved that now as a credit card auto deduction pledge. So I've actually set myself up a little visual reporter report that I've flagged into the user menu field. So if I run that now, and that was donor number 3, you can see here all of my auto deductions for the regular campaign, but as I mentioned before, there could be a number of different campaigns there. Here are the credit card numbers, and as you can see, you can't just dump those out and then use those for malicious purposes. They're all encrypted, and of course, for the two that I've got here, these ones are the auto deductions from the direct debits as opposed to from the credit cards. Okay, just checking my details. All right, now one of the things that you have to watch out for a little bit, and we'll talk a bit more about this when we go through the auto deduct run, but if a auto deduct is rejected and you therefore perhaps remove it from the batch, the next due date typically won't be updated. Therefore, you might find that when you look at an auto deduct pledge record, that the next due date could well in fact be several months ago if there's been 2 or 3 months since their last donation actually went through. So you do need to be wary of that when you do run your auto deducts. When we run the auto deduct, it actually will always pick up things up till a particular date. So anything that's 3 months old will still be picked up, but when it gets picked up and processed, it will only update it by 1 month. It won't update it to the future for the next one. So you do need to be rather careful about that. Now, to access the auto deduct menu, we simply go into donation processing, and then on the far left as a sub-menu, you have auto deduct. Now, as I mentioned earlier on, you can run the auto deduct several times a month, but for most people they would run it once. The reason that you may do it several times is if some people wanted their deduction done in the beginning of the month, some in the middle of the month, some toward the end of the month, you could set it up in such a way that you have different dates and they therefore get picked up on different runs. But you do still again have to be careful if people fall behind by a couple of months, and then when you update their credit card details, if you don't forward date their next due date, then it's potentially possible that those people will get picked up on several runs in the same month. Now, before you actually run the auto deduct, and usually this would occur perhaps a couple of weeks in advance, it's useful to run this print lapsed credit card report, because you don't want to be trying to send lapsed credit cards to the bank. So by running this, what we can actually do is we can actually see whose credit card is about to expire or perhaps has already expired. So if I go into this, so typically you'd put in the date. So I'm running this for the month of May. So if I say they must be expired by the 5th of May, then it's going to give me a report on everybody who's got a credit card that's in the past effectively, that's now expired. We also have the option here to create a Microsoft Word merge file, and if we do that, we can then use a particular document. So it's going to create a text file called lapcard.txt, and I have an option to say, yes, I want to load this lapsed cards document here when it finishes. So as I enter through, I now have a list of the fields. So these are the fields that are going to appear in my merge file, and I can add different ones, but for now that's all I need. So I'm just going to do this as a print preview so that we can actually see the report. And you can see there that it's actually picked 2 records. So donor number 2 for Basil Faulty, his expiry date is 04, so that expired last month. This one here expired the month before, and you can see the card number has got the first 4 and the last 4 digits there. So you don't actually get to see the whole number, so no one can actually misuse this report. But at the same time, it should have actually created a Word, well, gone into Word and opened up my document. So that's going to use that lapcard.txt, and I can simply do a merge. And so now I have a letter there to Mr. Basil Faulty telling him that his card is expired and can we update the details. And then if I go down, I've got the other one there to Mr. Joe Bunker doing the same thing. So If you do this a couple of weeks in advance, you can send off those letters and hopefully they'll respond. Alternatively, you can ring them up and just update their details. And so when you do that, all you need to do is go back into the actual Donman and get rid of that, and I'll get rid of this. So I can escape from there. I could just simply go back into donor entry, call up donor number 2, say, click on the pledge, and if he's got a new expiry date, I can simply put a new expiry date there. But if it's a new card, I can, well, obviously I have to do this as well. So let's say the new is 12/20, and I'll update the credit card details, and let's pretend that I've now changed that to the new one, and I can then save that away, F10, or click on save, and that's now updated. Okay, so always a good idea, because when you come to run your credit card or your auto deduct batch, it's best to have as many up-to-date credit cards as possible. Okay, so now it comes to the time where we actually want to run our credit cards, our auto deduct. Now, most people who do it once a month tend to do it towards the middle of the month, simply so that you avoid the end of the month and the beginning of the month, because it's quite often busy there running extra reports and various things like that. So many organisations tend to pick the 15th of the month or the nearest working day to that. So let's assume that, you know, it's now the 15th of the month. So again, I go to donation processing and the auto deduct, and then I simply go to create auto deduct batch. Now, by creating this auto deduct batch, I need to be at the point of processing where I'm entering donations. Now, you probably would run this as a separate run through your end of day, but that's nothing to say that you couldn't have your own batches already in there, or you could put your auto deduct batch through and then process some manual donations if you wanted to. It's really up to you how you want to do that. But you do need to be at that entry stage. Now, I have the gateway module on. Sorry, I probably should have cleared this file out. This message here you may find from time to time. What happens is, when you run an auto deduct batch, if you've got any direct debit ones, and we had 2 there, it actually writes those away to a file called the direct file. And later on, I'll show you how you can then create a file for the bank of those direct debits that you upload to the bank. But in the meantime, I've gone in to create a batch of donations, and it says, hang on, you've already got some things in the direct debit file. If you don't create that file for the bank, that direct file won't get cleared, and therefore, if no one had done anything since last month, you may well have direct debit entries from last month, and you're about to add some new ones this month. By doing that, when you create the file for the bank, you're likely to actually deduct them twice, because you've still got that deduction from last month and you're adding one from this month. So if you get that and you're not expecting to have any direct debits already in there, then there is a bit of a problem. Now, the reason I've got this is because I did an auto deduct batch before and I didn't clear it out. So I'm actually going to skip ahead a little bit here, and I'm actually going to show you how to undo an auto deduct batch. So if you've created an auto deduct batch where you're not using the gateway and therefore the money hasn't actually been deducted from their credit card, then if you found that there's a mistake, you've done something a little bit wrong, or maybe some of the options you chose were incorrect, you can undo an auto deduct batch. In fact, it will undo all auto deducts that's sitting in the temporary file, in the NewDon file. So I'm just going to say yes to that and put my initials in. Okay, and this is just the output, so I don't really need to look at that. So again, let's go into the create auto deduct batch. So I'm now starting off with a clear direct file. There's no donations or auto deductions in my batches, so I'm clear to start. So as I was starting before, I have the gateway module, but I don't have it turned on at the moment. In fact, even when I turn it on, I don't have any real details there. But at this stage, I'm going to run it as though I didn't have the gateway. So I'm going to say no to that. and it says, do you want to select by particular campaigns? So this is where you may run different campaigns slightly differently. If I say yes to that, I then have a choice of up to 20 different campaigns that I can run this for. So if I only wanted to run this, say, for regular or for pledges or any other pledge campaign that I had, I could specify which pledge campaigns I want to actually look at. If I don't care, I can just leave that blank, and I can just, that would effectively be a no there. All right, so now I have the choice of, do I only want to do credit cards, or do I want to do direct debits, or do I want to do both? Now, some organisations prefer to keep their direct debits and their credit cards separately. So what they would do is they would run a credit card run. They would run through the rest of the end of day, including the end of day update. Once that had done, they could then go back and then they would run it for their direct debits. In my case, I don't really care whether it's one or the other or both, so I'm going to say both. All right, now I mentioned that on the pledge record there was that question about should they receive a receipt, and I said that you could override that. If I want all of my auto deductions in today's batch to get a receipt, I can say A for all. If I want none of them to get one, then I can say N for none. But by leaving it as a yes, then it will honour whatever is on that pledge record. So if I've said yes to a pledge, maybe for those people that only give once or twice a year, then they will get a receipt. But for anybody where it said no, they will not get a receipt. Next question. Okay, do you want to bank the credit card donations in this batch? Most of the time the answer would be yes. If you only have a few credit card donations and you might process those via an EFTPOS machine first, then you would probably say no to that because they've already been processed, and this will simply generate the donations rather than you having to type them in yourself. But it's very important that you say yes to that. If you say no, then you've got nothing effectively to send to the bank. If you're using the gateway, nothing will get sent to the bank, but the credit card donations, or in Donman, the donation records will still be created, so it will look as though they've made those donations, but you won't have the corresponding money in your bank account. Okay, do we want to exclude pledges with expired credit cards, yes or no? I think this depends a little bit whether you're using the gateway or not, and I might ask Gary if he has any further information on that when he concludes. But if you've got a token, I think you can actually get by without the expiry date, so you could actually let them go through even though the expiry date has since passed. But if you're taking it to the bank on a credit card form, or you're sending it as a file to the bank, the expired credit cards are not going to go through. So typically you would say, yes, I want to exclude those. And when we run this is going to produce a report, and you'll be able to see from that report which donations were excluded because they had expired credit cards. Now, hopefully, if you've run that lapsed credit card report earlier, maybe a couple of weeks ago, hopefully you know which ones are expired and you've got new card numbers for them and new expiry dates, but I'm sure there'll still always be some that are expired. Do you want to include the Amex and the diners? If you want to include those, you can say I for include. If you only want Amex, maybe there's a reason for that, you say M for must be, or if you don't want them at all, you'd say E for exclude. If we said include or must be, you then have the choice of whether to bank those at all or not. So again, you'd probably say yes to that. The same thing applies to diners. I'm not going to include those. So today's the 9th of May. So by default, when it looks for pledges that are due for a deduction, it's going to use today's date. I can change that. If we wanted to run this a little bit early, but normally you would run it for the 15th, I could change that to the 15th of the month, and then any pledge that was due up until the 15th of the month will be included in my auto deduct run. Here, we can actually override that again and say, look, include anything that's due up to the end of this month. So anything that is due in the month of May will then be included. I'm going to say no. Now, do we want the credit card numbers in full on the report? So if you were going to take the this auto deduct report and then take the credit card numbers and punch them into an FPOS machine or do something over the internet, then you may wish to print the full credit card numbers, and you would say yes to this. However, I'm going to say no, so that's okay. Now, if you're using a gateway, you have a choice as to what happens when the card gets rejected. If the card gets rejected, you can choose to move the next due date forward by whatever period it is. So normally when a credit card donation is successful, it will update by a month. If it's 12 times a year, or if it's once a year, it'll update it by a year. With with gateway transactions, you have the choice of whether to do that or not. Depends on how you follow up. If you've got a large number of auto deductions, and each month when you run your auto deduct batch, there may well be plenty of rejections, you might choose to say, no, don't move it ahead. Then you can contact those people that have been rejected, try and get new details or work out why it's being rejected, and then perhaps in a week's time, once you've updated all the pledge details, you could then run this auto deduct batch again. If they still fail, you would actually say yes, move them ahead. So it sort of gives you an opportunity to do a large number of retries, maybe a week later, hopefully after you've got some more details. So the choice is yours. If you're only going to run this once, and then if they do get back to you with more up-to-date details, you could process that manually if you wanted to. Okay, do we want to do a trial run? If we do a trial run, basically it'll produce the report. It won't go out to the gateway, but at least you'll be able to see what it's going to attempt to do a deduction for. I'm going to say no to that. Do I want to begin? Yes, I do. So it's going to run. Now, you can see it's selected 7 records. So up the top there, down here, this one it says next amount of 25 is not included as card expiry has lapsed. So that's that Joe Bunker, 1st of the 5th. I would have thought that might have actually gone through, but anyway, it's claiming that as being lapsed, so it's not going through. All of these other ones here, as far as it's concerned, have gone through, but of course at this stage we haven't sent anything to the bank. This is a fairly good report to tell you everything that's going on and shows you which cards have been attempted and which ones have failed because of the expiry date. Okay, once I've got that, I would typically then simply go back to my rest of the end of day. I'd run my credit card listings if I needed banking credit card listings if I needed to. That may include creating a file for the bank that you send to the bank. At some point, you'll get that response back from a bank to say these cards failed. And under those circumstances, what you then need to do is effectively edit that batch and remove those donations from that batch. That's if you wait for the response from the bank. The other alternative is you can complete the rest of the end of day processing if you're in a hurry, and then when you get those rejections from the bank, you can then reverse those donations out. So the choice is yours as to whether you choose to edit the batch and remove them before they go through end of day, or whether to actually reverse those once you've gone through end of day. With the gateway, of course, if they fail, then they're not actually going to end up in that batch. So you don't have to do any editing like that. There's no reversals required at all because those donations don't actually go through. What I'm actually going to do now is I'm actually going to undo that batch again like I did earlier on, and I'm going to turn my gateway on. Now, because I don't have a proper gateway set up, any of the credit card ones are going to fail, but at least it will show you what the report looks like, and there's another file that we need to look at as well. Okay, so I'm going to say yes again to this, and I don't need to look at the output from that. So if I go back into here, and I can click on new donations, it's telling me there are no donations in the temporary file. So I'm going to run it again. Now, if I turn on the gateway over here, okay, it's been enabled. But as I said, I've got bogus data there, so it's never going to work. So we go into auto deduct menu again. We're going to run our auto deduct batch, We're going to do it exactly the same as before. We're going to say both to that. Restrict them all. Yeah, yep. All of this is the same. Not going to change anything here. So go yes. Now you might see if you click little transaction screen that's probably too fast to see across the network there. Warning, some cards were rejected by the gateway. A text file was created called gateway rejects.txt. So once we've had a quick look at the report, we'll go and have a quick look at that, that file as well, so you can actually see what's been rejected and why. So if I go OK to that, here's my report. But now you can see a lot more of these. This following one hasn't been included because it was rejected by the gateway with error. So there's quite a few of those ones along the way, plus we've got our expired credit card. So out of all of these, the only ones that have gone through is Mr. Johnny Be Good, and you can see that that was a bank account one, a direct debit, and Mrs. A. Jones, again, a direct debit one. So having looked at that, I can quickly go and have a look at that rejects file. It's in my DM work directory, gateway rejects.txt. And here it is. It's a tab delimited file, so it's a bit hard to read in just a straight text editor. But if I go into Excel, I think that was the last file that I actually looked at, so I don't really need to pick it. There it is, gateway rejects. It's a text file, so I'm just going to click on Finish. And if I can maximize that a bit better. So you can see all of the details that are saved away, and towards the end here, you can see what the error actually was. So the no post response from server basically is because it can't connect because I've got bogus details in there. Okay, so if you do get those rejects when you're using the gateway, then you need to check that out and perhaps contact the donor to find out why. Maybe they need to give you new card details if maybe it's been cancelled or lost or stolen or something along those lines. Okay, now having done that, having created that batch, because there are two direct debit entries there, at some point I need to create the disk for the bank. Now, if I'm running several auto-deduct batches and some of those have got direct debits, then I'd obviously wait until that's finished. But when I go to create disk for bank, this allows me to create that file. Oh, okay, look, I haven't got details set up, so that's probably not very good. So what it should have is there's something like ANZ ABA, CBA ABA, and as I enter through here, it probably won't like to do this, but I'll try and do it anyway. Okay, so it looks like it's done it, but it's going to create a file basically called .aba. Just for your information, the place to set up those direct debit details is under going to your organisation, fundraising, modify history archive, and hopefully we all know the password, and under modify credit card bank info. Now see there's nothing set up at all on this system here, but it's down in this bottom section here where we need to fill out those details. So in order for you to be able to actually do direct debits, you need to contact the bank and set up an agreement with them, and they will then give you the relevant details to fill in here. So, this is where you'd put in something like CBA or ANZ or whoever the bank was, and then all the details here that the bank sends you. Once that's set up, you can then create those files. The bank will then give you some sort of process where you can upload that ABA file to the bank, and then you're able to get those deductions. Of course, those deductions are probably going to, if there's any failures there, will probably come back sometime later. So typically for your direct debits that have been failed, you would probably go and have to do a reversal because you would have finished your end of day by that. Now, if I go back into donor entry to one of those donors that failed, like I think donor number 2 added pledge, you can see here down in the comments, gateway rejected, today's date, no post response from server. So if you just came to that and say, why hasn't they been deducted, you can actually see that if they're on the gateway. Okay, all right, so that's pretty much it for the the auto deduct, one of the things that you should try and do, and this is not just relevant to auto deduction, but pretty much for pledges in general, is try and keep the next due date up to date. So even if someone's been rejected and you're not using the gateway, and even if you can't get their next detail, the credit card details, for a little while, when you do get those details, don't forget to update the next due date, because otherwise potentially you could update them, or you could deduct from them a couple of times in a month if you're doing that way. So by all, whatever you can, try and keep that next due date current. I'm going to hand over now to Gary, who can perhaps close off this webinar.
Thanks, Murray, and hello, everybody. So following on from what Murray was just saying, if I've got somebody who is doing an auto deduction, as you can see on the screen here, they're auto deducting, their details are in there. If the person has said they don't want to do the auto deductions anymore, what we can do is cancel the pledge. In order to do that, we can just come into this field here, put a cancel date in, and then select a reason. I'll do a couple of things with this pledge before I cancel it, because it'll actually remove all my auto deduction details, but I'll show you how we can do that fairly easily. If we've got somebody that has given us new card details or something like that we need to update their pledge, or even an expiry date, in this case I have got the gateway enabled, so when I put the card details in the expiry date, the system will then go out to the gateway and replace the actual card number with a token. If I don't have the gateway, I can just simply come in here and change the actual expiry date on the card, and it doesn't impact on anywhere else. If, however, I'm doing it based on a gateway, then if I change that and just say, okay, now the new card is dated, the June 2020, I still need to go through and say, yes, edit the card number. Even if I don't change the card number, or even if it's got a token there at the moment, we need to go through this screen. The security number field is there already, but at the moment it's not being utilized. So the card organizations, MasterCard, Visa, etc., haven't said at this point that that is a mandatory field, whereas for online shopping it is something. So when it does become mandatory, we've sort of got the field, we're already ready to go with that. So as I enter through, you can see it just brought up that splash screen saying it was communicating with the gateway, and now it's brought up a message to say the token card ID issued in place of the credit card number. So if I click OK or press Enter, you'll see that what was the credit card number is now being replaced by this token, which means that in my database I no longer have the actual credit card details, which is making me a whole lot more secure as far as, I don't have credit card numbers and expiry dates and things like that floating around in the system that potentially people could report on. Most, like Visual Reporter reports, etc., won't pull those details out, as Murray showed you before, because they're encrypted by default, but some of the reports do allow us to decrypt those numbers. So to be 100% safe, this is a much better way of doing that. What happens for future auto deductions is that instead of sending the credit card number and the expiry date, the system will just send this token. And in the beginning it's a T for token. In this case it's an E-way token. If it's secure pay, it'll have TS. And then from there it'll have a randomly generated either number or set of characters and numbers to say that is the token for that particular card. Yeah. So I don't then need to worry about having those things floating around my system. Okay. So when I enter, that will go through. Anything, as I said, we do from now on, even if we save the pledge, and we come back in, okay. Edit the card number, yes. You'll see the token is still there, and that will be there forever. When we put the credit card number in, or if there's a new number, etc., with Secure Pay, there is an option for cards except for Amex cards that can be set as a recurring payment, which means, as Murray was sort of saying a little bit earlier, that if it's set as a recurring payment, then the expiry date becomes a little bit null and void, which means yes, it's still a good idea to keep up with people in case they change cards and stuff like that when the expiry date is reached, but the transaction will still go through until the card actually fails. If it then fails, it'll go into that gateway rejects file that Murray was mentioning before when we do the auto deduction run. Okay. So we can only use a token in the case of a recurring payment. One-off payments, that's totally irrelevant. We just process those and it goes through the gateway. The credit card number is not stored in the system anywhere. It just basically is used to do the transaction, and that's the end of that. If I've got a person who wants to change their details, exactly the same. If they said, look, I used to use a MasterCard, I'm now using a Visa, the same sort of thing. We can then just come into the pledge, update it to suit. It may be the same expiry date. Yes, if I do. Put in my credit card number. Okay. If I do something wrong, like I've done in this case, it's going to tell me there's something wrong. So either the prefix is wrong, so the beginning number is wrong, there's wrong number of digits, etc. like that. And when we do the next rollout or the next update for Donman, the new series of cards, I think the MasterCards, which start with 2, will also be accepted by that. So we'll be able to go through and say, okay, look, that's fine. At the moment, that won't happen. Okay, so if I put a valid card in, again, it's just updated that, and now it's given me a totally different token based on that card number. If we wanted to, as I said, go through and cancel the pledge, we can just put today's date, and then whether you have a reason set up or not, you can then choose the reason, that we're cancelling the pledge. It may be just a donor request. When we enter that, push enter, it comes up with a message saying this pledge still has the next date or next amount. So normally we'd say, yes, clear those out. And you can see it now makes the pledge non-valid for anything. So there's no date of next gift, and there's no amount of next gift, which means it can't get picked up by my reports or even my auto deduction. So you can see down the bottom here, the auto deduction yes, no field has now been cleared out. And when I save this pledge, which I'll do now, and go back to that same person, you'll see the auto deduction details are now also removed from the system, because if I'm cancelling the pledge, I certainly don't need to keep those details online. If the person then signs up again, I'd be coming in and I could say, let's remove the reason code, remove the cancellation. I can then put a date in here for what the next payment date actually will be. So if I said, as Murray was sort of mentioning before, that it's the middle of the month that I do my payments, and in this case I'm not there yet, so I could say 15/05/17 is the date of next gift, and then down here I can update the details. Okay, so expiry 10/21. Okay, so I'm back to where I were. So it's very easy to either cancel the pledge or just reinitiate it in that case. If perchance I've got somebody who has done a pledge previously and it was a fixed pledge, a fixed pledge that was only good for a number of payments, and they've now paid that up, and they said, look, I now want to give money to the same thing, but it's under a totally new thing. The two options we can do is either update the pledge to suit. So it might be that the person has said, look, previously I was giving $25 a month, now I'm going to give $50 a month, okay, and go through. It might be the same time of year, but where previously I would have had something like here to say this person is going to give me 12 payments, and as each payment was processed, the balance due here would have gone to 0. So if I've got this, I would need to clear those out, but when I'm reinitiating the pledge, make sure that the date to put here as the date of next gift is the date that the next payment actually will happen. Okay? Because it may be, 3 months old or 4 months old, since they stopped paying the previous one. And as Murray was saying, when you do the auto deductions, the system looks at how many times per year that is, and will increment this date one payment period only. Okay, so it can't say, okay, we're now in May, I'm going to, make that date the middle of next month or middle of this month, whatever it may be. Unfortunately, it doesn't work that way. It'll just go through. So then I can remove those details there, and just update the pledge to suit. The other option is I could totally delete the pledge and just create a new one. All of the person's past payments, like their donation history and things like that, will not be impacted by that in any way, shape or form. So I can always see that they've given money for the campaign previously, but the pledge is there really just to help me roll over the payments, every month or every quarter, whatever it may be, for that particular donor. And so there's not too many things in this part of it as far as, updating things on that, updating cards, cancelling the pledge, whatever it may be. But certainly this field here is something that we have to be very, very wary of. We don't want to have it where, it's showing here that the date of last gift was in February, and I don't want this date to still say March, because when I do the auto deduction, that will only go up to April, and if I do the auto deduction again in the same month, it will then go up to May. So I'm potentially going to debit the person's card twice in the 1 month, which is not really what we want. Okay, so I'll hand back to Marla now, and we'll look at any questions about this subject. And hopefully we've covered a whole lot for everybody.
Thanks so much, Gary. And just for anyone who joined us after housekeeping earlier on, if you do have any questions, we have some time now to answer those. So all you need to do is open the control panel to the right of the viewer window, type your question in the box provided, click on send. I'll receive those and I can read them out. So just going back a little way to a question for Murray, and it was from Diana. We currently have a lapsed credit card letter that we action manually. How can we set this up using the lapsed credit card merge document?
Well, the lapsed credit card program actually creates...
Sorry, Murray, just quickly, do you want me to hand over controls to you? So do you need to show anything?
Sure, yep, okay, yep, all right.
Sorry.
Okay, so when we go into that program, the print lapsed credit card report, it creates, if I say yes to this question here, it actually creates a file now. I think the default is lapcard.txt, but of course you can call it anything you like. And in here you can place your document. Now, if you set that up as a merge document, then you can perhaps use it. But a lot depends on whether, in fact, your document has got merge fields in there. And if they are, they're probably not going to be the same as in here. If I go into my document again, okay, let me show you preview results. So here you can see the merge fields that I'm using are called LDate, address 1 through to 6, salutation, card type, expires, card number. These are the same ones that we see when we actually go through this. This is the list of the fields that I'm currently outputting. So in order for you to use your document, you need to turn it into a mail merge document associated with lapcard.txt or whatever you call your master merge data file, and then use these merge fields within it. So it shouldn't be that hard. So that's a Word issue, but if you know how to set up a Word document to be a mail merge document, you just associate it with that lap card by simply going into select recipients, use existing list, and then you can navigate to your DM work directory, select lapcard.txt as your data source, and then you can start putting in your merge fields into your document. Back to you,
Thanks,
Marla.
Murray. And another question from Diana was, if you're using the gateway, would you process Amex and credit cards separately?
Amex, I think, can go through the gateway. Gary, does Diners go through the gateway?
I think it depends on the gateway you're using, but they have got different mechanisms, so you'd have to arrange with the gateway to be able to do Amex and Diners, whereas MasterCard and Visa are pretty much, the normal. So if you've got those card types, it's just a matter of arranging it with the gateway provider so that you can do those transactions using the same mechanism.
If you weren't able to do those through your particular gateway, then obviously you would have to do that as a separate auto-deduct batch, and you could turn off the gateway in the meantime between the two. So you could perhaps do your Visa, MasterCard, and do those as one batch, and then immediately afterwards you could then do the same thing for your Amex, say if that wasn't accepted by your gateway, and then you would have to also run the credit card banking report as part of the normal end of day that would then produce that Amex report or a file for the bank, whichever way your Amex gets to the bank.
Okay. And just some clarification for Jenny. Can you talk a little bit more about processing expired credit cards? She said now she's new to her organisation and she's told that she's not able to do this even via a pledge.
The only way you could possibly do it is if you were using tokens. Otherwise, everything will reject it because the card date has actually expired.
I'm not sure if that's what you mean.
Yes, she's just saying yes, using tokens.
Would depend on the gateway that you're using. I think Secure Pay sets them as recurring payments, whereas eWay doesn't necessarily.
So basically what you would need to do is
you can still process it.
For those
Jenny's just saying they use eWay.
So what you're going to have to do basically is contact the donor and get some updated details. So that could be a new card number or it might be an updated expiry date.
Okay.
So once you've got that, you could actually process the donation manually if you wanted to, or you could just put it in, update the details in the next due date, and that'll then go through next month.
Okay. And Dominic just had a question around looking at end of financial year pledge receipting. Do we have another webcast that we've done in the past on that, or?
I think there is.
I think we've done 2 or 3.
Yeah, we might find that and.
But in the Donman manual folder, there's a subfolder called Special Purpose PDFs, and in there you'll find a PDF just on that subject, just on end of year receipts.
Okay, great. And I do think we might have a webcast, so we'll see if we can find that and send it across.
Yes.
So with that, we're coming up to time, so we might, I think we've gotten through everybody's questions. So we'll wrap it up there. And we did joke before today's session that we would be holding our next webcast with even more on pledges and auto deductions, but we won't do that too. But we do have another webcast coming up on the 20th of June, which is a Tuesday again at 2 o'clock Australian Eastern Standard Time. We will send out details about that shortly. And as we mentioned, you will all find recordings of our previous webcasts on the Donman website when you go to donman.net.au, and it's under the Resources tab and Recorded Webcasts. Otherwise, you can go directly to the Client Support Portal where you go and log your tech support calls, and you'll find it there. So that concludes our webcast today. Thank you so much for taking time out of your afternoon to spend with us, and we look forward to seeing you at our next webcast in June. Thank you again. Goodbye for now.
Goodbye, everyone.